This video lecture has been produced using artificial intelligence with the supervision of Belhaven faculty and staff. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to dive into a really critical conversation at the intersection of leadership, organizational growth, and a Christian worldview. We're especially going to look at this inside the demanding world of high-growth technology ventures. This is a space where the assumptions we hold about leadership get tested constantly. And it's a place where our faith has some incredibly profound practical implications. This is a very important topic for us to consider. So here's our roadmap. We'll start by looking at the unique pressures that scaling puts on a leader. From there, we'll contrast the common, sort of default secular leadership model with a much more robust model of leadership as stewardship. Then we'll dig into how core virtues like humility and justice actually become practical necessities for a growing organization. After that, we'll see how values have to be embedded into systems, not just words. And finally, we'll reframe the entire purpose of growth itself. Now, our central concern here isn't whether an organization grows, but how a leader stewards their influence, their authority, and their responsibility as that growth starts to accelerate. You see, leadership is never static, especially not in these rapidly scaling environments. And this presents a profound challenge to our character and to our deepest convictions. This is really the core issue for our consideration today. Think about it. In the early stages of a venture, leadership is often very direct, very personal. It's expressed through the founder's vision, their personal authority, and that can be really effective for maintaining speed and coherence. But as the organization gets bigger, that personality-centered control just has to mature. The real challenge is to build principled systems that can sustain integrity and justice across a company that's far larger than any one person's direct influence. Frankly, this is where many promising ventures and their leaders begin to falter. So, to understand the alternative, let's first consider the default framework that so many of us encounter in the business world. We can call it the secular leadership model, and it's intensely focused on tangible outcomes. This gives us a helpful baseline for our comparison. In this model, the primary goals are things you'd expect: market dominance, maximum efficiency, and, of course, a killer competitive advantage. Now, let's be clear, these goals aren't inherently wrong. The danger creeps in when growth itself becomes the ultimate measure of success, and these goals get detached from deeper moral considerations. In this view, power is often just seen as a tool to be accumulated for the organization's gain, which can create a culture that rewards results, sometimes at the expense of character. And then, in such sharp contrast to that focus on outcomes, Scripture presents a radically different scorecard. Micah 6:8 doesn't ask about your market share or your efficiency metrics. It asks about justice, mercy, and humility. This one verse really establishes the fundamental tension we are exploring. This brings us to an alternate foundation for leadership, one that's completely reframed by a Christian worldview, the concept of leadership as stewardship. This gives us a much more robust framework to work from as we move forward. So what is stewardship? At its heart, it's the recognition that authority is not something we own. It is something that is entrusted to us. And this means our accountability extends far beyond the boardroom or the stock market. We're accountable to God. Leadership then is a sacred trust, and this simple reframe changes absolutely everything. And this is not a new idea. It is deeply rooted in Scripture. Genesis frames our role of dominion not as exploitation, but as responsible care. Proverbs reminds us to commit our work to the Lord, to depend on God in our planning, not just on our own strength. And Micah, as we've just seen, calls us to justice and humility. Taken together, these principles form a direct challenge to any leadership model that's built on pure control or self-promotion. Okay, so as an organization grows, these principles of stewardship, and specifically humility and justice, they transform from being simply personal virtues into becoming absolute organizational necessities. This is a critical point to understand as we move from theory to practice. Just think about it for a moment. When a venture is small, a leader has personal oversight. They know the people, they're in the details, but as it scales, their influence becomes systemic. All of a sudden, their decisions are shaping policies and creating structures that impact people they may never ever meet. In that environment, humility is no longer just a private virtue. It's what allows a leader to delegate authority and to build systems that don't depend on their own heroic efforts. It prevents bottlenecks and it avoids ethical blind spots. And likewise, justice becomes critical. You simply can't rely on informal trust in a large organization. You need formal, fair systems for hiring, for compensation, and for advancement. Without them, even the best intentions will quickly unravel. And the reason justice is so non-negotiable is rooted in our theology. You see, a Christian worldview insists that people are not cogs in a machine. They're not just human resources to be exploited. They are image bearers of God, and because of that, they deserve inherent dignity and fairness. This single conviction has to shape every single system we build. So this leads us to a crucial, practical question. How do we actually embody these values? It's not enough to talk about them or put them on a poster. They must be embedded structurally right into the bones of the organization itself. This is really where our conviction has to meet our practice. You know, an organization's culture is shaped less by what we say and more by what our systems actually reward. So you have to ask, does your incentive structure reward results above all else, or does it also reward faithfulness and integrity? Do your metrics only track market share, or do they also measure human well-being and long-term sustainability? The real answers to these questions reveal an organization's true character. Growth is an amplifier. It doesn't magically create new values in a leader or an organization. Instead, the pressure of growth reveals the values that were there all along. This provides a very helpful way to think about the entire issue. Now, this often raises a common question. Does a focus on stewardship mean we have to reject ambition or excellence or innovation? And the answer is not at all. Faithful leadership doesn't discard these pursuits. What it does is recontextualize them. It places them within a moral framework that prioritizes responsibility over ego and service over domination. The temptation, especially in a fast-paced environment, is always to compromise. It's to put off the hard ethical reflection until things are more stable, until after the next product launch. But Scripture teaches that faithfulness in the small things is the very foundation for handling greater responsibility later on. The character you form in the early days is precisely what will sustain you when the real pressure comes. And this brings us to the final, and perhaps most important, question. From a Christian perspective, what is the ultimate purpose of all this growth? What is it actually for? This brings our discussion to its logical conclusion. Well, the secular model often treats growth as an end in itself. The goal is simply expansion and market domination. But from a stewardship perspective, growth is merely a means to a much higher end. The goal becomes the faithful use of influence for the good of other people and ultimately for the glory of God. This completely reorients our motivation and our purpose. And what we discover is that this approach isn't just about being faithful, it's also about being effective. A leadership model that's rooted in stewardship is, yes, morally grounded, but it is also strategically wise. It builds organizations that are resilient and designed to endure far beyond the inevitable volatility of the market. And so I will leave you with this question for your own reflection, both now and throughout your careers. It is the question that a stewardship mindset continually asks. Is the growth we are pursuing building something faithful? Is it building something of lasting value that will truly endure?